Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. Charlie Kirk was a man who spoke his mind, loud, bold, and fearless. Loved by many and hated by some, his words sparked fire wherever he went. But one September afternoon, as he stood before a cheering crowd at Utah Valley University, that voice of courage was silenced by a single gunshot. The nation froze. Who would kill a man for his ideas, and why? From the chaos of the shooting to the long, painful hunt for his killer, this is the story of two lives, one taken and one lost, in a moment that shocked the country. This is the Charlie Kirk Murder Case. Charlie Kirk was a man who lived loudly. He spoke fast, moved fast, and believed even faster. Every room he entered seemed to shrink under the weight of his voice. He was tall, always in a neat dark suit, and carried himself like someone born to be on a stage. His eyes, sharp and restless, searched every face as if he wanted to convince everyone of something. For years, Charlie had been a strong public speaker. He traveled across the country giving talks about freedom, politics, and youth power. Many people loved him. They waited in long lines just to take photos or shake his hand. But there were others who disliked him just as much. They said he was too bold, too loud, and sometimes cruel in his words. Still, Charlie never slowed down. He believed he had a mission, to wake people up, as he liked to say. It was early September when his team announced his next big event, a speech at Utah Valley University. Students and locals filled the auditorium long before the program began. The banners outside read, "Stand for Truth." Volunteers handed out flyers with Charlie's face printed on them, smiling, confident, and full of energy. Inside, cameras waited, lights glowed, and a buzz of excitement ran through the air. Behind the curtain, Charlie adjusted his tie. His assistant, Megan, reminded him of the talking points and smiled nervously. "Big crowd today," she said. Charlie nodded and replied, "The bigger, the better." He believed that every speech was a chance to change someone's mind. As the clock hit 3 p.m., the crowd stood up and clapped. Charlie walked onto the stage with his usual grin and lifted his hand in greeting. "Thank you. Thank you, everyone." His voice filled the hall like music. "Let's talk about truth, courage, and what it means to stand tall in this world." He spoke for 15 minutes, pacing across the stage, his words echoing off the walls. Students recorded him on their phones. Reporters scribbled notes. The room was alive with cheers and laughter. Then, in one terrible second, that energy turned to fear. A loud crack cut through the noise, sharp, sudden, and final. For a moment, nobody moved. Charlie froze, his eyes wide, his body twisting as he fell to the ground. People screamed. Chairs toppled. The crowd pushed toward the exits in panic. Megan ran to him, shouting his name. "Charlie, stay with me!" Blood stained his shirt near his neck. The security guards shouted for everyone to stay down. Someone yelled, "He's been shot!" And the whole hall filled with chaos. Outside, police sirens wailed. Within minutes, officers swarmed the campus. Students cried on the grass. Reporters went live with shaky voices, announcing the unthinkable. Public speaker Charlie Kirk has been shot during a live event at Utah Valley University. At the hospital, doctors worked desperately, but the wound was deep and severe. After 30 minutes, the chief surgeon stepped out and said quietly, "We did all we could." The word spread fast. Charlie Kirk was dead. The news hit the country like a storm. Television channels broke their schedules. Social media flooded with shock and anger. Supporters mourned. Critics argued. Everyone had something to say. In cities far away, people lit candles outside community halls. In others, crowds gathered, chanting his name. The president released a short statement calling it a tragedy for all Americans. Even those who had disagreed with him said no one deserved such an end. But behind the noise and grief, investigators were already at work. Detective Laura Hale, the lead officer from the Utah State Police, arrived at the scene before nightfall. She was calm, sharp-eyed, and known for her patience. "Seal every exit," she ordered. "Collect every camera recording from this building." Her team combed through the auditorium. They found a broken window behind the stage, a shell casing on the grass outside, and marks that suggested the shooter had fired from a nearby parking structure. Laura crouched near the shattered glass. "It was one clean shot," she murmured. "Someone who knew exactly what they were doing." A technician handed her the bullet they had retrieved. It was from a .30-06 rifle, powerful and deadly from long distance. Whoever the shooter was, they hadn't come here by accident. Back in the control room, officers reviewed security footage. On one video, a shadow moved behind the trees near the west parking lot. Another camera caught the same figure leaving quickly after the shot, carrying something long wrapped in cloth. Laura paused the screen. "Zoom in," she said. The image was blurry, but a face flickered into view. A young man, maybe early 20s, with dark hair and a nervous expression. "Run a facial match," she ordered. By midnight, they had a name: Tyler James Robinson. He was a 22-year-old former student who had dropped out a year earlier. He lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. His social media accounts were full of political posts, arguments, and late-night rants. One line caught Laura's eye: "Some voices must be silenced for truth to live." The next morning, the police arrived at his apartment, but Tyler was gone. His car, a gray sedan, was missing too. On his table, they found an open notebook with only one sentence written inside: "I had to do it." The hunt had begun. Laura stood by the window of the crime scene van, watching the sun rise over the quiet campus. The flags outside flew at half-mast. "We'll find him," she said softly. "We have to." News networks played the footage again and again. The moment of the shot, the panic, the fallen speaker. The country wanted answers, and fast. But Laura knew better than to rush. Every crime had a story, and every killer had a reason. Her job was to find both. And somewhere, miles away, Tyler Robinson drove along a deserted highway, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. The radio announced the death of Charlie Kirk. Tyler turned the volume down, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the endless road ahead. He whispered to himself, "It's done." But deep inside, he knew the story had only just begun. The morning of the tragedy began like any other for most people in Orem, Utah. The sky was bright and blue, the air smelled of early autumn leaves, and the campus of Utah Valley University was full of excitement. Posters with Charlie Kirk's smiling face hung from poles and walls. Students took selfies near the banners that said, "Truth has no fear." Charlie arrived at the university around noon. He had slept little the night before, spending hours preparing his speech. He was always like that before a big event, driven by energy, restless with thoughts. As his black car stopped near the main hall, students waved and cheered. He smiled, waved back, and shook a few hands before walking inside with his small team. Inside, his assistant Megan carried his notes and water bottle. "You okay?" she asked, noticing he seemed quieter than usual. "Just focused," Charlie said. "Big crowd today." He looked around at the rows of seats filling fast. The stage was simple, just a podium, a banner, and 2 large screens showing his face. The technical crew checked the lights and microphones. Everything seemed perfect. At 2:45 p.m., the announcer stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder of Freedom Next and a voice for truth, Mr. Charlie Kirk." The room erupted in cheers. Charlie stepped out, smiling confidently. He raised his hand in greeting, and the noise grew louder. Thank you," he began. "It's good to be here with so many brave young minds ready to think freely." The first part of his speech was light. He joked, told stories from his college tours, and spoke about leadership. The audience laughed and clapped. A few students live-streamed the event. Others held up their phones to record. Then Charlie's tone changed. He began to speak about division in the country, about courage, and about how fear silences truth. His words grew stronger, sharper. "If we lose the courage to speak," he said, "then we lose everything. You must never let fear control you." People cheered. Cameras flashed. It was just another powerful speech, until it wasn't. At 3:17 p.m., as Charlie walked toward the edge of the stage, a sharp sound cracked through the air. For half a second, no one understood what it was. It sounded like a balloon bursting or a chair breaking. Then gasps filled the hall. Charlie stopped mid-sentence. His microphone dropped from his hand. A red stain spread quickly on his white shirt near his neck. His knees buckled, and he fell forward onto the stage floor. Screams erupted. "Get down!" someone shouted. People ducked behind seats. Others ran for the exits, pushing and tripping over one another. The sound of chaos drowned everything. Megan rushed to the stage, shouting his name. "Charlie! Charlie!" She pressed her scarf against the wound, her hands shaking. "Call 911!" she screamed at the guards. Security officers ran toward the stage, scanning the crowd for danger. The shooter was nowhere inside. Outside, one guard spotted movement in the parking area, a figure running, holding something long wrapped in cloth. "Over there!" he yelled, pointing. But by the time they reached the lot, the shooter was gone. Police cars arrived within minutes. Officers cordoned off the area, guiding terrified students out of the building. Paramedics rushed Charlie onto a stretcher, their hands moving quickly. Megan followed, tears streaming down her face. News spread like wildfire. Within 20 minutes, television networks interrupted regular programs. Headlines flashed across screens. Breaking, public speaker, Charlie Kirk shot at Utah Valley University. At the hospital, doctors worked in a blur. They tried everything, compressions, transfusions, emergency surgery, but the bullet had torn through a vital artery. After 30 minutes, the lead surgeon stepped out, his face pale. "We did all we could," he said quietly. "I'm sorry," Megan broke down. One of the security guards, a tall man named Daniel, put his hand on her shoulder. No one spoke for a long time. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, hundreds of people gathered with candles and flags. Some cried openly. Others held signs that said, "Justice for Charlie." The police chief, Samuel Briggs, addressed the media. "We are treating this as a deliberate attack," he said. "Our detectives are pursuing every lead." Detective Laura Hale, already on site, studied the building layout. She noticed the open window behind the stage and the clear line of sight from a parking structure about 150 meters away. She walked up there with her team and found what she was hoping for: a single shell casing and a scuff mark on the concrete where someone had rested a rifle. The weapon itself was gone, but a small towel lay nearby, half buried in dust. Laura carefully picked it up with gloves. "Get this to the lab," she said. "We might have DNA." Back at police headquarters, officers reviewed camera footage from every corner of the campus. One clip showed a man walking briskly through the parking lot minutes before the shooting. He wore a gray hoodie and carried a long case. After the shot, the same man appeared running toward a side road. Laura paused the video. "Zoom in," she said. The face was faint but clear enough. "Run it through the database." It didn't take long. The match came back. Tyler James Robinson, 22, former student, currently unemployed. No prior arrests, but known for online arguments and angry posts about politics. That night, officers went to his apartment. The door was unlocked. The lights were off. Inside, they found an empty gun case, a half-eaten sandwich, and a note on the table that read, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." His car, a gray sedan, was missing. Laura stood in the doorway, looking at the note. "He's running," she said softly. "He knows we're coming." By midnight, every police unit in the state had his photo. Roadblocks were set up on highways. Helicopters searched from above. At 2 a.m., a report came from a gas station 40 miles away. A young man matching Tyler's description had bought food and water, his hands shaking. The clerk said he looked scared, not angry. "He kept muttering something," the man said. "Something like, 'It had to be done.'" Laura stared at the map spread out on her desk. "He's heading south," she said. "Maybe to disappear. But he won't get far." Outside, the night was quiet. The same calm sky that had smiled over the campus in the morning now looked down on a city heavy with grief. In a small motel room a few towns away, Tyler sat on the edge of a bed, his rifle beside him. His face was pale and tired. The television played the news, his name, his picture, his crime. He whispered to himself, "They'll never understand." But deep down he already knew. There was no escape now. Detective Laura Hale sat in her office with a half-empty cup of coffee, staring at the glowing screen on her desk. Tyler James Robinson's photo was everywhere now, on television, in newspapers, and across social media. His thin face, short dark hair, and quiet brown eyes didn't look like those of a killer. But the evidence said otherwise. It had been 12 hours since the shooting. The FBI and state police had joined the investigation. Helicopters searched from the air while roadblocks surrounded every exit out of Utah County. Laura spoke to her team firmly. "He's scared," she said. "He knows we're after him. That fear might make him careless. We use that." The detectives nodded. They already had enough clues to paint the beginning of a picture. Tyler had purchased a .30 Aero-6 rifle 6 months earlier from a gun show in Provo. He had also bought bullets and a long-range scope online. The towel found at the scene carried his DNA. And the notebook in his apartment contained troubling words, phrases, like truth must be forced and sacrifice brings meaning. But the most chilling evidence was a message recovered from his online chat account just hours before the attack. He had written to an anonymous friend, "It happens today. After that, silence will make sense." Laura read those words again and again. They sounded both angry and hopeless, like a man trying to convince himself he had a purpose. By the next morning, the search had stretched into neighboring counties. Police cars patrolled highways, and officers checked every motel, rest stop, and gas station. Flyers with Tyler's photo covered walls and windows. At 9 a.m., a call came from a farmer near Spanish Fork. He reported seeing a gray sedan parked behind his barn the night before. "Thought it was just someone sleeping," the farmer said. "But this morning it's gone, and I found food wrappers on the ground." Laura and her partner, Detective Mills, drove there immediately. The farmer led them to the spot. "Tire marks were still fresh in the mud." "Prints?" Laura asked the forensics officer. "Yeah," he said. "Same tire pattern as his car." Laura looked toward the hills stretching south. "He's heading deeper," she said quietly. "He's trying to disappear." Meanwhile, in a small mountain town 2 hours away, Tyler sat inside his car, parked near a forest road. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He listened to the radio. Every station carried his story now. "Police continue to search for 22-year-old Tyler Robinson," the reporter's voice said. "He is wanted in connection with the murder of public speaker Charlie Kirk." Tyler turned the volume down and stared at his reflection in the window. "Murder," he whispered bitterly. They make it sound so simple. He felt empty. The rush of anger that had driven him the day before was gone, replaced by fear and confusion. He remembered Charlie's face on stage, the look of surprise, the sudden fall, and his stomach turned. He hadn't expected it to look like that. He took a deep breath and looked at the rifle lying on the passenger seat. "What have I done?" he muttered. For a long time, he just sat there. Then finally, he started the engine again and drove toward the mountains. Back at police headquarters, Laura was piecing together his background. She read reports from his college professors. Quiet student, average grades, few friends. His parents had divorced when he was 16, and he had drifted between relatives for years. "Any known mental issues?" she asked Mills. "None recorded," Mills replied. But neighbors said he was withdrawn. Talked to himself sometimes, social media. "Mostly political rants," Mills said. Anger at both sides. Confused ideas. He thought everyone was lying. Laura sighed. So he was looking for meaning. And he thought killing someone like Crick would give it to him. She looked at the map on the wall, full of red pins marking sightings. "We're closing in," she said. "He's not a trained fugitive. He'll make mistakes." At noon, another tip came in from a gas station in Payson. The clerk said a nervous young man matching Tyler's photo had bought water, food, and bandages. He looked shaken, the clerk said. He asked if there was a forest trail nearby where he could camp. That was enough. Laura gathered her team. "He's on the move again." "Let's go." The police convoy sped down the highway, lights flashing. Helicopters circled above the mountains. At a checkpoint near the canyon entrance, officers spotted fresh tire tracks leading off the road into a dirt path. Laura ordered them to follow slowly. "He might be armed," she warned. "No risks." They drove for half a mile until they saw it, a gray sedan abandoned near a cluster of pine trees. The driver's door was open, weapons ready, officers fanned out. Laura approached the car. The engine was still warm. Inside, she saw a half-empty bottle of water, an open backpack, and the same rifle used in the murder, unloaded, lying across the seat. "Where is he?" Mills whispered. Laura pointed toward the woods. "He's close." They moved quietly through the trees, scanning the ground for footprints. Suddenly, a voice called out from deeper in the forest. "Don't shoot!" The officers froze. A figure stepped out from behind a tree, Tyler Robinson. His hands were shaking, his face pale. He looked more like a lost boy than a killer. "Put your hands up!" Laura shouted. Tyler raised his arms slowly. "I'm not fighting," he said softly. "It's over." The officers surrounded him and handcuffed him without struggle. He didn't resist, didn't even look angry. When Laura read him his rights, he just nodded and whispered, "I know." At the station, Tyler sat in the interrogation room staring at the wall. Laura entered with a folder and a calm expression. "You want to tell me why you did it?" she asked gently. Tyler didn't answer. "You planned it," she continued. "You bought the rifle, you watched his schedule, you knew exactly where to shoot." "But why, Tyler?" He looked up slowly. His voice was quiet, almost tired. "Because he wouldn't stop talking," he said. "Every word he said felt like fire in my head. I wanted to stop the noise." Laura studied him carefully. "So you thought killing him would make things quiet?" Tyler's eyes filled with tears. "It didn't," he whispered. "It's louder now." The news of his arrest spread fast. Crowds gathered outside the police station shouting for justice. Candlelight vigils for Charlie Kirk grew bigger each night. Some people called Tyler a monster. Others called him sick. For Laura, it was never simple. Sitting at her desk that night, she wrote in her report, "Suspect captured without resistance. Confession obtained. Motive unclear. Possible psychological instability mixed with ideological confusion." She closed the file and looked out the window at the city lights. Another case solved, but no victory. Nothing could bring back the man whose voice had filled that hall, and for Tyler Robinson, the road ahead was only beginning. The trial, the judgment, the world's eyes, all waited for him now. The day after Tyler Robinson's arrest, the small town of Provo was quiet. Rain fell softly on the police station roof, tapping like a slow clock. Inside, cameras flashed as reporters waited behind the yellow line. Everyone wanted to see the young man who had shaken the country. Tyler sat in a gray interrogation room, wearing the same clothes from his arrest, mud-stained jeans and a dark hoodie. His wrists were cuffed to the table. His eyes were hollow, staring at nothing. Detective Laura Hale entered, holding a folder full of papers. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "You slept?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Didn't need to." Laura opened the file. "We found your rifle, the towel, your fingerprints on everything. You confessed already. What I need to understand is why. Was it hate, politics? Something else?" Tyler blinked as if searching for words. "He made me feel small," he said finally. "Every time he talked, I felt like I didn't exist. Like people like me didn't matter." Laura studied him quietly. "So you thought killing him would make you matter?" Tyler looked down. "I thought it would make people listen." She sighed and closed the folder. "You've made them listen, all right, but not to you." For a moment, silence filled the room. Only the rain could be heard outside. Then Tyler said softly, "I didn't want him to die that fast." Laura looked up sharply. "You didn't want him to die?" He shook his head again. "I just wanted to stop him. I thought if I scared him, he'd stop talking." I aimed lower, but the gun kicked harder than I expected. His voice trembled. It all happened too fast. Laura leaned back in her chair. She had heard many confessions before, some cold, some full of excuses, but this one was strange. Tyler sounded neither cruel nor proud. He sounded lost. In another room, the police chief watched the recording. "Do you believe him?" he asked Laura later. "I don't know," she admitted. "He planned everything too carefully for it to be an accident. But I think he truly didn't understand what he was doing." The chief nodded. "The prosecutors will decide that. Our job is to give them the truth." Outside, the rain had stopped. Reporters crowded near the doors as officers escorted Tyler to a holding cell. Flashbulbs lit up his pale face. People shouted questions. Why did you do it? Do you regret it? But he said nothing. One voice from the crowd yelled, "You're a monster!" Tyler flinched slightly, but kept walking. That evening, the small-town courthouse became the center of national attention. Television trucks lined the streets. Police blocked roads as angry supporters and mourners gathered. Some carried candles and flowers. Others carried signs demanding justice. Inside the courthouse, Tyler appeared for the first hearing. He looked small behind the glass wall, his hands still cuffed. When the judge asked for his name, he spoke so softly the microphone barely picked it up. "Tyler James Robinson," he said. The prosecutor listed the charges: aggravated murder, use of a firearm in a public place, obstruction of justice, and flight from law enforcement. Each word echoed in the courtroom like a hammer. When asked for a plea, his lawyer answered, "Not guilty, Your Honor," citing the need for a full psychological evaluation. Gasps filled the room. Some people shouted in anger. The judge banged his gavel. "Order!" he said firmly. Tyler was let out quickly, head down, as cameras followed. In the police station later that night, Laura sat at her desk, watching the news replay the courtroom scene. A photo of Charlie Kirk flashed on the screen, smiling, confident, alive. Then it switched to Tyler's mugshot, where he looked pale and frightened. The contrast was haunting. Megan, Charlie's assistant, visited the station that evening to give her statement. Her eyes were red from crying, but she spoke clearly. "He was so happy that day," she said. "He told me, 'Megan, this speech will be special.'" She paused, wiping her tears. And it was. Just not the way he meant. Laura listened, her heart heavy. "We'll make sure justice is done," she said gently. Megan nodded but said nothing. Meanwhile, in his cell, Tyler sat on the bed staring at the small window. The walls were gray, the air cold. He thought about his parents, who hadn't called. He thought about Charlie's face, frozen in shock. He thought about the noise of the crowd. The screams, the sirens. He whispered to himself, "It's over." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. The trial was coming, and the world wanted to see him punished. Late that night, a guard brought him food. Tyler didn't touch it. Instead, he asked, "Do you think people can forgive someone like me?" The guard frowned. "That's not my call." Tyler smiled weakly. "Didn't think so." He lay back on the bed, listening to the hum of the lights. Sleep came slowly, heavy with dreams of flashing lights and falling faces. Over the next few days, investigators finished gathering evidence. They collected phone records, online messages, and the rifle's purchase receipt. Everything fit neatly into a chain of guilt. But one detail troubled Laura. Among Tyler's belongings was a small notebook, the same one found in his apartment. On the last page, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "It was never about hate. It was about silence." She showed it to the chief. "This isn't just murder," she said. "It's something deeper, some kind of personal war in his head." The chief nodded slowly. "Maybe, but the law doesn't care about wars in your head. The law cares about what you did." Outside, the world kept watching. News anchors argued over whether Tyler was evil or mentally ill. Talk shows debated free speech, violence, and blame. Social media turned into a storm of opinions and outrage. For Charlie's supporters, he became a symbol, a man who died for speaking his mind. For Tyler, there was no sympathy left. His name became a warning. Still, Laura couldn't shake a strange feeling. When she thought of him, she didn't see a monster. She saw a confused, broken young man who had let his anger and loneliness twist him into something dangerous. But no feeling could change the truth. A man was dead, and another's life was ruined. A week later, Laura visited the cell block to deliver a report. As she passed Tyler's cell, he looked up. "Detective?" he said quietly. She stopped. "What is it?" He hesitated, then asked, "Do you think people will remember me?" Laura looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "but not the way you want." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." Outside the station, the evening sun broke through the clouds, casting gold light across the wet streets. People were still leaving flowers under a photo of Charlie Kirk taped to the station gate. Laura watched for a while, her hands in her pockets. She felt the weight of everything, the noise, the anger, the loss. Justice had begun, but peace was still far away. The investigation into the murder of Charlie Kirk was far from over. Even though the police had caught Tyler Robinson and he had confessed, there were still many questions left unanswered. The nation wanted to know why. What could drive a young man with no criminal record to kill a public figure in cold blood? Detective Laura Hale sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of files, photos, and reports. The air smelled of paper and coffee. Outside her window, rain clouds gathered again, casting long shadows across the city. It had been 2 weeks since the shooting, and every news channel still talked about it daily. On her desk lay a copy of Tyler's psychological report. She opened it again, reading the lines she already knew by heart. Subject shows signs of emotional instability, anxiety, and obsessive thought patterns. Likely suffers from feelings of isolation and resentment toward authority figures. Laura sighed. So many warnings, she whispered to herself. And no one saw them. Her partner, Detective Mills, entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You've been here since morning," he said, placing one on her desk. "Couldn't sleep?" Laura replied. "The prosecutor wants everything perfect before the trial." Mills sat down. "Anything new?" She nodded. The FBI analyzed his online accounts. He had been posting under fake names for months. Most of it was angry writing, long rants about politics, power, and lies. But here's the strange part. She opened a printed page and showed him. It was a message posted 2 weeks before the attack. It read, "They all talk, but no one listens. Maybe they will when it's quiet again." Mills frowned. "So he planned this for weeks." "Maybe longer," Laura said. He watched Charlie's tour schedule online. He even commented on a fan page under a fake name, asking what time the Utah event would start. Mills leaned back. "So it wasn't random at all." "It was chosen," Laura nodded slowly. "Yes, and that makes it even harder to understand." Meanwhile, prosecutors prepared for trial. The district attorney, Rachel Morgan, was firm and focused. "We have the weapon, we have DNA, we have his confession," she said during a meeting. "This is an open and shut case. We'll seek the death penalty," but not everyone agreed. Tyler's defense lawyer, Martin Graves, believed there was more beneath the surface. "My client is mentally unstable," he told reporters. "He didn't act out of hate. He acted out of illness." The country split in opinion. Some wanted the harshest punishment possible. Others believed the system had failed a troubled young man who needed help, not death. For Laura, it was not her job to take sides. Her job was to find the truth and present it clearly. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about Tyler's quiet voice in the interrogation room. "I just wanted to stop the noise." A few days later, Laura visited Tyler in jail again. The guards opened the door and led her inside. He looked thinner, his eyes sunken, but calm. "You've been reading, I see," Laura said, nodding to the pile of books beside him. He smiled faintly. "They let me borrow some from the library." "Helps me think. About what?" she asked. "About why I did it," he said softly. "But I still don't know the answer." Laura sat down. "You said before that Charlie made you feel small. Was that really why you chose him?" Tyler thought for a long moment before answering. "No," he said. "It wasn't just him. It was everything. The news, the people online, everyone shouting. I couldn't stand the noise anymore. I thought if I did something big, people would finally listen." Laura tilted her head. "Listen to what?" He hesitated. "To the silence," she frowned. "That doesn't make sense, Tyler." He looked away. "I know. It didn't make sense even then." After the meeting, Laura sat in her car in the jail parking lot, thinking. The more she learned about Tyler, the less she understood. He wasn't a hardened killer. He was broken inside, lost between anger and despair. That night, she went back through the crime scene photos. She noticed something odd, a small folded paper near the broken window where the shot had been fired. Somehow, it had been overlooked during the first sweep. She called the evidence technician immediately. "Can you check if that paper was collected?" she asked. "Give me a second," he said, rustling through files. Yeah, found it in box 14. We didn't think it was important. Looked like part of a wrapper. Open it, Laura said. A moment later, the technician read aloud. It says, "I'm sorry, Mom." That's it. Laura closed her eyes. Even killers say sorry to someone, she whispered. The trial began a month later in Salt Lake City. The courthouse was packed with journalists, cameras, and protesters. Inside, Tyler sat quietly beside his lawyer, his head lowered. The prosecutor stood tall, her voice clear. This was a planned, deliberate act of murder, she told the jury. The defendant aimed a rifle at a man speaking peacefully to a crowd. He fired with intent to kill. This was not madness. It was malice. When it was the defense's turn, Martin Graves spoke calmly. My client is guilty of a terrible act, he admitted. But he was not in his right mind. He believed he was stopping something evil, when in truth he was lost inside his own fear and anger. That is not cold-blooded murder, it is sickness. The courtroom listened in silence. Laura testified on the second day. She explained how the police tracked Tyler, how the evidence connected him, and what he said during questioning. When asked for her opinion, she paused. Do you believe he understood what he was doing? The prosecutor asked. Laura looked at Tyler, who was staring at the floor. I think, she said slowly, he understood the action, but not the cost. Outside the courthouse, people gathered with signs that read, Justice for Charlie and Stop the Hate. Others held candles and prayed for peace. In the middle of that crowd, Megan stood quietly holding a single white rose. She had been with Charlie in his final moments, and she still heard his voice every night in her dreams. When reporters asked for a comment, she simply said, I just want the noise to stop. Weeks passed, and the trial continued. Expert witnesses spoke about Tyler's mental state, his history, and the influence of online radicalization. Psychologists explained how loneliness and anger can twist a person's thinking until right and wrong blur together. But the jury didn't see confusion. They saw a choice. After 10 days, they returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Tyler showed no emotion as the judge read the words. Only when the judge said, "The state will seek the death penalty," did his lips tremble slightly. Laura watched from the back of the courtroom. Justice had been done, but it didn't feel like victory. Outside, rain began to fall again, washing over the courthouse steps. That night, Laura returned home for the first time in days. She turned off the lights, sat by the window, and listened to the sound of the rain. For the first time, she understood what Tyler had meant by the noise. The world was full of shouting, anger, and endless arguments. Somewhere along the way, a lost boy had believed he could silence it with violence. But in truth, his act had only made the noise louder. The trial of Tyler Robinson ended with silence inside the courtroom, but outside, the noise was louder than ever. The media called it the crime that divided the nation. Some saw justice served. Others saw another tragedy. 2 lives destroyed instead of 1. Charlie Kirk's supporters filled the streets with flags and candles. They called him a hero, a man who spoke without fear. His speeches were replayed on television, his words quoted everywhere. Truth has no fear. Murals of his face began to appear on walls across the country. At Utah Valley University, a statue of Charlie was placed near the main hall where he had given his final speech. Students laid flowers there every day. Some cried, others prayed. The place that once echoed with his voice now stood quiet, a symbol of loss and memory. Megan, his assistant, visited often. She would sit on the steps with a notebook on her lap, writing letters she never sent. Letters to Charlie. Letters she wished she had written before that day. You always said truth needs courage, she wrote one afternoon. But I never thought courage would cost you your life. In the prison miles away, Tyler Robinson waited for his fate. The judge had not yet set a final date for sentencing, but everyone knew what was coming. He sat alone in a small gray cell, reading books and writing in a journal that the guards allowed him to keep. Each page was filled with his quiet handwriting, thoughts, regrets, memories. I thought silence would save me, one line said. But silence is the loudest thing in the world. He no longer shouted, no longer argued, no longer blamed anyone. He ate little and spoke even less. The other inmates rarely saw him outside his cell. One day, Laura Hale visited him again. She didn't have to, her part in the case was over, but something inside her needed to see him one last time. When she entered the small meeting room, Tyler looked up, surprised. "Detective Hale," he said softly. "I didn't think I'd see you again." "I didn't either," she replied, sitting across from him. There was a long pause between them. "Do you hate me?" Tyler asked suddenly. Laura shook her head. "No, I don't hate you." "Why not?" "Because hate won't change anything," she said. "It never does." He lowered his gaze. "Do you think people will ever forgive me?" Laura thought for a moment. "Some might. Most won't. But forgiveness isn't what you should be asking for. You should ask how you can live with what you did." Tyler nodded slowly. "I think about that every day." She stood up to leave, but before walking out, she said quietly, "You took away one voice, but you gave thousands of others a reason to speak louder. Remember that." He didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at the table. Months passed. The news cycle moved on, but the story of Charlie Kirk still echoed across the country. His foundation, Freedom Next, continued his work, funding student debates and youth programs in his name. Every year on September 10th, people gathered at the university to light candles and play recordings of Charlie's last speech. The air would fill with his words again. "If we lose the courage to speak, then we lose everything." For Megan, the memories never faded. She kept working for the foundation, traveling to schools and giving talks about peace and dialogue. She always ended her speeches with the same words: "We can disagree without destroying each other." The audience always stood and clapped. Some cried. Detective Laura Hale received an award for outstanding service, but she didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, she spent that day alone by the lake near her home. She threw small stones into the water and watched the ripples spread. She thought about the faces she had seen, the proud face of Charlie on stage, the terrified face of Tyler in the forest, the grieving faces of those left behind. She whispered to herself, "Justice doesn't bring peace." A year later, Tyler's final hearing arrived. The courtroom was quieter this time. No reporters shouted questions. Only a few people sat in the benches, lawyers, guards, and a few family members of both sides. The judge asked if Tyler had anything to say before sentencing. He stood slowly, his hands trembling. "I know what I did can't be undone," he said. "I took a life that I can never give back. I don't ask for forgiveness. I only ask that people learn from my mistake. I thought violence would silence the world, but it only made more pain. I'm sorry. To everyone." His voice broke, and for the first time, tears ran down his face. The judge nodded solemnly. "You will spend the rest of your life in prison without parole," he said. "May you find peace, even if the world cannot." The gavel struck once, and it was over. Outside, Megan stood quietly on the courthouse steps. The air was cold, but she didn't move. Laura walked up beside her. "It's finished," Laura said softly. Megan nodded. "No," she said. "It never really finishes." They stood there in silence for a while. Then Megan took a small candle from her bag and lit it. The flame flickered gently in the wind. "For Charlie," she said. Laura nodded. "For truth," she added. They watched the flame together until it burned low. In his cell, Tyler sat at the small metal desk, writing in his journal again. The guards would later find his final entry before lights out. "I once thought the world was deaf. I shouted with violence. But now I know silence isn't peace. It's just the sound of hearts breaking quietly." He closed the notebook, placed it under his pillow, and lay back on the bed. The night was still. Somewhere beyond the prison walls, the world moved on, fighting, talking, shouting, but also healing. In time, the story of Charlie Kirk became more than just a headline. It became a lesson, a warning about anger, about words, about the power they hold. Children learned about him in schools, not just as a victim, but as a man who believed in standing up for what he thought was right. And somewhere, deep inside those lessons, another truth grew quietly. that one act of hate could never silence courage. Because courage, once spoken, doesn't die, it echoes. And even though Charlie Kirk's voice was gone, its echo lived on, in every candle, in every heart, and in every person who chose words over violence. The courtroom is quiet now. Charlie Kirk's voice no longer fills the halls of Utah Valley University, but his words still live in the hearts of many. Tyler Robinson sits behind bars, a young man forever marked by one terrible choice. 2 lives ended that day, one in body, the other in spirit. The world moved on, but the questions remain. What drives hate? What silences reason? In the end, Charlie's message stands stronger than ever, that truth may be challenged, but it cannot be killed. This was the Charlie Kirk Murder Case. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends.